city and the wilderness, be with us this morning. May the meditations of all our hearts and the words of my mouth be acceptable to you. Amen. How many of you remember your childhood with fondness? I see, right? Not everyone, but that's, you look back and you have these beautiful memories, and we look at those days with great affection. I remember as a child hearing my family's story as a child in the diaspora here in the United States. And my grandmother would sit around with her children and remember beautiful stories in their life in Puerto Rico. And my aunts and uncles would just reminisce about people in the neighborhood, the games they used to play, the places they used to cherish. And some of you may be too young to know, or even to remember, that before VHS, there were these home movies that were these reel. Do you remember that? And there were home movies, people used to go with a camera that was really heavy and go around and record their kids and their loved ones. And this was for, boys and girls. This is not to be connected to a TV to watch it. This had its own separate projector that needed to be projected onto a screen. Am I right? Or you couldn't connect it to the television. It was separate and it was heavy. You needed a couple people to just bring the whole equipment up and get it set up. So my family had some of those. And once in a while, when we were all gathered, my uncles would take the task of putting all of that together so that we may watch some old movies that they had filmed while in Puerto Rico. Most of them were images of my great-grandmother, who was beloved by them. And, the lights had to be off, and so when the movie was over and the lights were put on again, most of the time, most of my family was crying. It was very emotional to watch these movies. And as a young child, I just want to say that because I wasn't like an adult when this happened, so that you don't think that I'm older. I just want to say I was young. I didn't fully understand what was happening, what was the whole emotional experience about. But I could see that remembering those moments meant a lot to my family. However, once in a while, when people sat around and remembered their histories as a family and individuals, someone would go and say, the good old days were not always good. Right? We romanticize the past, but the good old days were not always good. That's why when people said, we want to take America back to 1950, we kind of said, excuse me. The good old days were not always good for some people. Not all, but for some people. And so, my mother was one of them that would say, I am sorry, I don't miss certain aspects of those days where life was hard and difficult, and the economic situation was dire in our lives. And so, they would sometimes be realistic and say there were painful moments in our childhood and painful moments in our past. But we tend to redact our memories. Isn't that the truth? Yeah. We just edit them to fit a certain feeling in our hearts. And sometimes we redact them because the circumstances of the present are different, so we are missing an element of the past, or simply because we cannot accept the pain that we have endured. Again, we tend to romanticize the past. I believe it was Billy Joel who said that the good old days were not always good, and tomorrow is not as bad as it seems. So the Israelites were no different than we are. In the scripture this morning, they found themselves in a wilderness. And they were in this place in between slavery and freedom. And interestingly enough, they, like we in this world, don't usually go straight from bad to good, right? There's always this interim period that we have to endure in our lives. And so they were in between this place of being let go from Egypt to entering the promised land. But they were not in the promised land yet, so they were in this wilderness. That place that sometimes we describe in our lives as the place of regrets of the past and fear for the future. So you're regretting the past, you're fearing the future, and it just seems that we're paralyzed. Because we can't go back and recreate those experiences in our past, but then we're fearful and apprehensive about moving forward. So we're like, we're like a car trying to go up a mountain that do not have enough power. I mean, you're just trying to, you hear your car trying to go forward, but it's just saying, I just do not have enough gears. We're in that place. So when God called Moses to liberate the people of Israel from slavery, Moses had a simple but clear and fundamental question. Who should I tell them sent me? Who's telling me to do this? And God just said, just telling them, I am who I am. Yahweh has been translated in various ways. I am who am. One version says, I will be who I will be, and another one says, I will be what is needed at the time. I want you to stay with that one with me. I will be what is needed at the time. And so their freedom from slavery delivered them first into the wilderness before their final destination of the promised land. So now in this in-between space, they find themselves hungry, tired, perplexed, anxious. And now the God they were told that was Yahweh, the one that I will be what I will be, or better yet, I will be what is needed at the time, needs to show up. Because, they were like, we were minding our own business, being oppressed. And you're taking us out of our oppression, and yet we're not where we need to go yet. Our destination is not here, so you have to show up. So biblically, scholarship tells us that the wilderness represents this space in between, a space of trial, learning, discovery, and transformation. A space that will take us away from our normalcy. It's a place of discomfort, but it's also a place of discovery and deeper understanding. And I would add one element to this scholarship. I would argue that wilderness could also be what the Celtic spiritual tradition calls thin space or thin place. Spaces where the veil of the divine and earthly matters are thin. Places where you can sense the holy. A place of sacred experience with God. And in that thin place, in those thin places of our lives, where the humanness of our nature and the divine have the opportunity to come together, God's favor shows up. And so God's favor is also not absent from the Israelites in this story. God does not respond with chastisement at the complaints from the people. They complained that they were hungry and tired. God responds with food and bread and a solution to their condition. God responded with what they needed. And there are moments in life where our wilderness is emotional and it is spiritual. We are going through something. I remember, when I was a teenager, that was my line. People were like, "Damaris, what's going on with you?" I'm just going through something. That was my line. That was my go-to. I had an attitude and I had issues, so I said I was going through something. So there are times when our wilderness is emotional and spiritual, but there are times where our wilderness is physical. And like the people of Israel, when we are in the wilderness, the oppression of the past may feel better than our current condition. The difficulties of the past may seem, you forgot about all the pain and suffering, and you remember that one thing you were not when you were in slavery, when you were being oppressed, it was hungry. So, but everything else was forgotten. And sometimes we are in the space of, well, that was better than this, so I will forfeit the future. We may agree that today, the people of Puerto Rico, Mexico, and the Caribbean are going through a wilderness. In many instances, the places they have called home for generations are no longer there. The unprecedented devastation is an element that will put you have put them right in the middle of an unbearable and unknown wilderness. Carmen Yulín Cruz, she's the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, describing the situation in her town, said, "Comfort is no longer the same. Patience is fundamental. This will be a long journey." And that, my friends, are three elements of being in the wilderness. And our responsibility now is not to question the complaint of those in need, but to try to answer in some way to the need. But this nation as well is in the wilderness of its own. Here, just a few weeks ago, we had a Know Your Rights on DACA. And for the first time in my life, I saw attorneys being perplexed at the complexity of executive orders, not knowing what the letter of the law would allow them to really do. And I'm saying, my God, I've never seen anything like it. And we have a situation with our healthcare that has put us right into a wilderness. How do we move forward? Because forward is a direction we must go. Yes. So maybe in answering or in trying to wrestle with all of these questions, in navigating our own individual wilderness, maybe when we begin to accept that this is part of the process to get to the destination, there we may find this sacred place, the thin place that the Celtic tradition speaks about, the thin place between the human and the divine, the sacred experience. I would argue that also here in this neighborhood, there are many, many people who are going through a wilderness of their own. But our hopefulness comes in knowing that God hears us, that the God who will be what is needed at the time will show up in the wilderness, in the thin places, and moving into this narrative of bread and food and manna and quail is the importance of the Sabbath, surprisingly enough. And it's important to note that in Egypt, bread was given to the slaves only as a reward of productivity. But God's favor is countercultural in that God offers us bread and food and refreshments and rest even when we have not produced anything. Even in the Sabbath, God provides. And therefore, in the midst of the wilderness, there is a call to rest in God and to trust that in God's favor. There is a call to trust in what we do not see, but know that if we keep moving forward, we'll find. And away from the demands of production for bread and the empire and the oppression of the past, we may find that place in God's wilderness. There is a call to stop and take the bread of life. And maybe this is a better appropriate message for Communion Sunday. But participate also in the couple salvation, which is just resonates so deeply with our faith. Friends, there are times in this wilderness, I would argue, that the loneliness and the silence from God may be deafening. But the world is challenging us, the Church of Jesus Christ, to find God in unexpected places. In those places where the divine meets our humanity. In those places of unexpected generosity and love. In those places of inclusion and understanding. In places of forgiveness and surrendering. There, God's grace and God's favor can be experienced. Amen. Amen.